My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm 42 years old, and until recently I was the finance manager at Dartwell Analytics, a mid-sized data analysis firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. For 11 years, I kept that company's books tight, clean, and accurate. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room. I didn't play golf with the executives or show up to every happy hour. I did my job, and I did it well. That was always enough for me. I had a system. Every quarter I'd run the numbers, identify inefficiencies, and present solutions that kept us profitable, even when the market got rough. I wasn't flashy about it. I just made sure the money made sense. My team was small, lean, and effective. We never missed a deadline, never had a discrepancy that couldn't be explained, and never gave anyone a reason to doubt our work. But in corporate America, doing your job well doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it makes you dangerous. It was a Monday morning in early March 2025 when I got the email. No subject line, just a message from HR with a corporate letterhead at the top. The body was 3 short paragraphs explaining that due to budget restructuring, my position was being eliminated effective immediately. My access to company systems had already been revoked. I was instructed to return my laptop and badge by the end of the week. No phone call, no meeting. No explanation beyond the bland corporate language about restructuring and cost-cutting measures. I sat there staring at my screen for a long time, the morning light from my office window cutting sharp angles across my desk. 11 years of my life reduced to a form email sent at 9 in the morning on a Monday. Not a word from Greg Halpern, the CEO I'd worked alongside since he was promoted 6 years ago. Nothing from Melissa Grant, the HR director who used to ask me for budget recommendations before making departmental hires. Just silence. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I should have been angry. Maybe I was, somewhere deep down. But mostly I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Part of me wanted to believe there'd been a mistake, that someone would call to apologize. But I knew better. Because here's the thing. I knew the real reason I was being cut. It wasn't about the budget. Dartwell wasn't struggling. In fact, our last 2 quarters had been some of the strongest in company history. No, this was about control. More specifically, it was about what I knew. Over the past 6 months, I'd noticed things. Small irregularities at first. Expense reports that didn't quite add up. Budget approvals that bypassed my department entirely. Contracts with vendors I'd never heard of, signed without the usual review process. When I started asking questions, I was told not to worry about it. Executive decisions, they said. Above my pay grade. But I'm a finance manager. Numbers are my language, and these numbers were speaking loud and clear. Someone was moving money around in ways that didn't make sense, unless the goal was to hide something. I'd started documenting everything, keeping copies of reports, flagging inconsistencies in my personal files. I think Greg realized I was getting too close, that I'd become a liability rather than an asset. So he did what executives do when they want to eliminate a problem quietly. He had HR send an email and hoped I'd just disappear. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this possibility for months. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I'm thorough. I've worked in finance long enough to know that when people start hiding things, someone eventually becomes expendable. I just made sure it wouldn't be me. 4 months earlier, back in November 2024, I'd been contacted by a private equity firm based in Austin, Texas. Summit Ridge Capital specialized in acquiring undervalued companies in the tech and analytics sector. They'd been watching Dartwell for a while, impressed by our financial performance but concerned about our leadership structure and data governance practices. They wanted an inside perspective from someone who understood the company's real value beyond what the quarterly reports showed. We'd been in quiet negotiations ever since. I'd provided analysis, identified operational inefficiencies, and outlined exactly how much value was being left on the table by poor management decisions. I never gave them confidential information, nothing that would cross ethical lines. Just my professional assessment of where the company was failing to reach its potential. When I got that termination email, I sent a single text message to my contact at Summit Ridge. I'm out. Time to move. 2 weeks later, Summit Ridge made their offer to acquire Dartwell Analytics. By late April 2025, the deal was done. And in early May, exactly 2 months after I was fired by email, I walked back into the Dartwell building. But this time, I didn't use the employee entrance. I went straight to the executive conference room on the 4th floor. Because I wasn't an employee anymore. I was the new CEO. The acquisition had been kept quiet until the very last moment. Summit Ridge preferred it that way. Less drama, fewer complications, and most importantly, it prevented key personnel from jumping ship before the transition. Greg and Melissa had no idea what was coming until the board meeting where the sale was announced. I wasn't there for that meeting, but I heard about it later from colleagues who were. Greg had apparently gone pale when he heard that Summit Ridge was taking over. Melissa kept asking who would be running the company during the transition. The board chair smiled and said the new CEO would be introduced the following Monday. That Monday was May 5th, 2025. I remember because it was raining, one of those heavy spring storms that Charlotte gets, the kind that makes the glass towers along South Tryon Street look like they're melting into gray. I drove to the office in my 2021 BMW 540i, the same car I'd been driving for the past 4 years. The leather interior still smelled faintly of coffee from my morning commute. I parked in the executive lot near the Ballantine Corporate Park entrance, where my name was already on a reserved space. Then I walked through the front entrance, past the reception desk where Sandra, who'd worked there for 15 years, looked up and did a double take. "Michael?" she said, confused. "Morning, Sandra," I replied calmly. "I have a 9 o'clock meeting with the leadership team. Conference room 4. She checked her computer, then looked back at me with wide eyes. "You're on the executive calendar." "That's right," I said. "Have a good day." I took the elevator to the 4th floor, the mechanical hum filling the silence. The leadership team was already assembled when I walked in. Greg sat at the head of the table, where he'd sat for the past 6 years. Melissa was to his right, tablet in front of her, looking professional and composed as always. The other directors were scattered around, including Tom Brennan from Operations, Linda Wu from Client Services, and David Foster from IT. They all stared at me as I entered. "Michael," Greg said slowly, "what are you doing here?" I set my briefcase down and pulled out a chair, not at the end of the table, but at the side, where I'd sat for years during budget meetings. "I'm here for the leadership meeting," I said. "Same as everyone else." Melissa leaned forward. "Michael, I think there's been some confusion. You're no longer with the company. Your termination was processed 2 months ago." "You're right," I said. "I was terminated, but that was under the previous ownership structure." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a document, sliding it across the polished wood surface to Greg. "As of 9 a.m. today, I'm the new CEO of Dartwell Analytics. Summit Ridge Capital closed the acquisition last Friday afternoon, and the board voted unanimously to bring me on as chief executive." The silence in that room was absolute. Greg picked up the document with shaking hands and read it. His face went from pale to red in about 10 seconds. "This is insane," he said. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted. "And I did. Summit Ridge acquired 100% of Dartwell's equity. They own this company now. And they've appointed me to run it." I looked around the table. "Now we have a lot to discuss, so let's get started." Tom Brennan, who'd always been a straight shooter, spoke up. "What does this mean for the rest of us?" "Good question," I said. "For most of you, it means business as usual. Summit Ridge isn't interested in gutting the company. They want to maximize value, which means keeping talented people and removing inefficiencies." I paused, letting that sink in. "However, there will be changes, significant ones. We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all departments, all contracts, and all expenditures. Anyone who's been doing their job well has nothing to worry about." I looked directly at Greg and Melissa. "Anyone who hasn't been doing their job well should probably start updating their resumes." The meeting lasted 2 hours. I outlined Summit Ridge's vision for the company, the immediate priorities, and the new reporting structure. We'd be implementing AI-driven analytics for better client insights and modernizing our data governance framework to meet current ESG compliance standards. Greg kept trying to interrupt, to assert some kind of authority, but I shut him down each time with facts and numbers. Melissa sat rigid in her chair, barely speaking. When we finished, I asked everyone except Greg and Melissa to leave. Tom gave me a small nod as he walked out. Linda looked relieved. David seemed confused but hopeful. When the door closed, I turned to the two people who'd fired me without a second thought. For a moment, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just business. It was personal. But it had to be done. "Let's be clear about something," I said. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to run this company properly. But part of running it properly means addressing the problems that led to its undervaluation in the first place." I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. These are financial irregularities I documented over the past 8 months. Unauthorized expenditures, contracts signed without proper approval, vendor relationships that don't appear in any official capacity. Greg's jaw tightened. Those were executive decisions. "No," I said calmly. "Executive decisions go through proper channels. These went around them, and some of them appear to violate company policy, possibly even federal regulations regarding financial disclosure." I closed the folder. Summit Ridge has hired an external auditing firm to review everything. They'll be integrating their findings with our compliance automation system. They start next week. Melissa finally spoke. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to do your jobs," I said. "Properly, by the book. No shortcuts, no favors, no hidden arrangements. If you can do that, you'll keep your positions. If you can't, the audit will make that clear, and decisions will be made accordingly." I stood up. "We have a department heads meeting at 2 this afternoon. I expect both of you to be there with detailed reports on your areas. No fluff, no corporate speak, just facts." I picked up my briefcase. "Oh, and Greg, I'll need you to move your things out of the CEO's office by the end of the day. I'll be working from there starting tomorrow." I walked out before either of them could respond. The rest of that first week was a careful balance. I met with every department head individually, reviewed their operations, and listened to their concerns. What I found confirmed everything I'd suspected. Under Greg's leadership, the company had developed a culture of favoritism. Certain people got bonuses regardless of performance. Pet projects received funding while legitimate initiatives were denied. And there was a clear divide between those in Greg's inner circle and everyone else. I started making changes immediately, but strategically. I didn't fire anyone in that first week. Instead, I implemented new policies. All bonuses would now be performance-based, reviewed quarterly with clear metrics. All projects would go through a formal approval process. All vendor contracts would be reviewed by both legal and finance before signing. These weren't revolutionary ideas. They were basic corporate governance. But at Dartwell, they were revolutionary because they'd been ignored for so long. By Friday, the mood in the office had shifted. People who'd been walking on eggshells for years suddenly felt like they could breathe. Meanwhile, those who'd been coasting on their connections started to get nervous. And Greg and Melissa? They were barely holding on. The audit had begun, and the preliminary findings were not in their favor. I went home that Friday evening and poured myself a bourbon, the amber liquid catching the last rays of sunlight through my kitchen window. I'd spent 11 years building financial systems at Dartwell, only to be discarded like I meant nothing. Now, in less than a week, I'd begun dismantling the toxic culture that had allowed my firing to happen. But I wasn't done, not even close. The real reckoning was just beginning. The audit results came back 3 weeks later, in late May, and they were worse than I'd anticipated. Not worse for me, but worse for Greg and Melissa. The external firm, Hendricks & Associates out of Atlanta, had found over $215,000 in questionable expenditures over an 18-month period. None of it was technically illegal, but all of it violated company policy and demonstrated a pattern of poor oversight. Greg had approved consulting contracts with firms that did minimal work. Melissa had processed bonuses for her direct reports that were well above the approved budget. There were conference trips that looked more like vacations, vendor kickbacks disguised as referral fees, and a general disregard for the financial controls I'd spent years implementing. I called a meeting with both of them on a Thursday afternoon. They came into my office, the same office Greg had occupied just a month earlier. I'd changed very little about it. Same desk, same view of downtown Charlotte through the window, the skyline hazy in the late spring humidity. But the energy was completely different. "Sit down," I said. They did, neither one looking particularly comfortable. I slid copies of the audit report across the desk. "I assume you've both reviewed this already." Greg nodded stiffly. Melissa kept her eyes on the document, her fingers tapping nervously against the armrest. "The board met yesterday," I continued. "They've authorized me to restructure the executive team as I see fit. That includes your positions." I leaned back in my chair. "Greg, you're being moved to a senior advisory role. No direct reports, no budget authority. You'll provide strategic input on projects as requested, but you'll no longer be in the operational chain of command." His face flushed. "You can't do that. I built this company." "You helped build it," I corrected. "And then you mismanaged it. The numbers don't lie. Under your leadership, operational efficiency dropped by 12% while executive compensation increased by 30%. That's not sustainable, and it's not acceptable." I turned to Melissa. "As for you, your role is being significantly reduced. You'll manage day-to-day HR operations, but all strategic decisions, all policy changes, and all executive hiring will go through me and the new chief operating officer I'm bringing in from Summit Ridge's network. Your bonuses and raises will be performance-based going forward, just like everyone else." She finally looked up. "This is retaliation." "No," I said calmly. "Retaliation would be firing you both the way you fired me, by email, without warning, without cause." I let that sit for a moment. "This is accountability. You're being held to the same standards you should have been holding yourselves to all along." Greg stood up. "I'm not accepting this. I'll fight it." "That's your right," I said. "You can contact legal and review your employment contract. You'll find that the acquisition triggered a change of control clause that gives the new ownership significant latitude in restructuring management. If you want to fight it, you'll lose, and it'll be expensive for you." I stood as well. "Or you can accept the new role, continue drawing a salary of $95,000 annually, still well above industry average for an advisory position, and maintain some dignity. Your choice." He stared at me for a long moment, then walked out without another word. Melissa followed, closing the door quietly behind her. I sat back down and looked out the window. The Charlotte skyline stretched before me, familiar and somehow different at the same time. I'd worked in this city for over a decade, building a career on precision and reliability, and I'd been discarded by people who valued loyalty less than convenience. But I hadn't come back to destroy them. I'd come back to rebuild what they'd corrupted. Over the next 2 months, through June and July, the changes accelerated. I promoted Tom Brennan to Chief Operating Officer. He'd been undervalued for years, stuck in operations while less competent people got executive positions. Under his leadership, we streamlined workflows, cut redundant processes, and improved client satisfaction by 23% in the first quarter. Linda Wu took over business development, a role that had been poorly managed by one of Greg's favorites. She brought in 3 major contracts in her first 60 days, more than the previous year's total. I brought in Sarah Martinez from outside the company to be our new CFO. She was sharp, thorough, and had a reputation for cleaning up financial messes. She and I worked together to implement new controls, modernize our accounting systems integrated with Salesforce Analytics Cloud, and establish clear reporting structures. The employees who'd been doing good work all along thrived. They finally had leadership that recognized and rewarded actual performance rather than political maneuvering. Morale improved, turnover dropped, and our financial performance started to reflect the company's true potential. Greg lasted 4 months in his advisory role. He showed up less and less, contributed little when he did, and finally submitted his resignation in early September 2025. The board accepted it immediately. No farewell party, no recognition ceremony. Just a brief announcement that he was pursuing other opportunities. Melissa held on a bit longer, but the writing was on the wall. She followed the new rules, but she did so grudgingly. Every policy change was met with resistance. Every new initiative was questioned. By mid-September, it was clear she'd become a bottleneck rather than an asset. Sarah and I restructured the compensation system one more time, tying executive bonuses to company-wide performance metrics rather than departmental budgets. When Melissa saw that her bonus for the year would be a fraction of what she'd been receiving under Greg's system, she gave her notice. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I replaced her with James Richardson, an HR professional from a Fortune 500 company, who understood that HR's job is to serve the entire organization, not just protect management. Within a month, employee satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in 5 years. By late September 2025, exactly 6 months after my return, Dartwell's transformation was complete. Revenue was up 18%. Profit margins had improved by 22%. Client retention was at 94%, up from 81% the previous year, and we'd been recognized by a major industry publication as one of the fastest-growing analytics firms in the Southeast. Summit Ridge was thrilled. They'd bought a mismanaged company for below-market value and watched it transform in half a year. Their investment had already appreciated significantly, and projections showed continued growth. As for me, I was exactly where I'd always been meant to be. Not hidden in the background, working to make others look good, but leading from the front, making decisions that actually mattered. One afternoon in late September, I was working in my office when Sandra from reception called up. "Mr. Reynolds, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." "Who is it?" I asked. "Greg Halpern." I paused. I hadn't seen or spoken to Greg since his resignation earlier that month. "Send him up." A few minutes later, Greg walked into my office. He looked older somehow, more worn down. The confident swagger was gone. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "Then why are you here?" I asked. He walked over to the window, looking out at the view he used to have. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. "I wanted to say I understand now. What you did. Why you did it." He turned to face me. "I convinced myself that firing you was a business decision, that you were a problem that needed to be solved. But the truth is, I was threatened by you, by how competent you were, by how much you knew. I didn't say anything, just waited. I thought if I got rid of you, I could keep doing things my way," he continued. "But all I did was eliminate the one person who was keeping this place from falling apart." He shook his head. "You didn't destroy me, Michael. I destroyed myself. You just made sure everyone could see it." "Is there something you need, Greg?" I asked. "No," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I get it now. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry." He walked out, and I never saw him again. I sat there for a while after he left, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the planning, the execution. It would have been easy to be bitter, to turn that bitterness into cruelty. Part of me had wanted that, wanted to see them suffer. But that wasn't who I was, or at least it wasn't who I wanted to be. I'd simply done what I'd always done, seen a problem, analyzed it, and implemented a solution. The only difference was that this time, the problem was the people who'd tried to eliminate me, and the solution was showing them exactly what they'd thrown away. I walked through the office one morning in late September, coffee in hand, and noticed something that had been missing for years. Energy. People were engaged. They were collaborating. The sound of keyboards clicking, quiet conversations about projects, even laughter from the break room. They actually seemed to enjoy being at work. It wasn't just about the improved compensation or the better policies. It was about respect. They were finally being treated like professionals who deserved clear expectations, honest feedback, and fair recognition. Tom stopped me in the hallway. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always," I said. We walked to his office, smaller than mine, but with a view of the parking lot where I'd parked as a regular employee for so many years. He closed the door and leaned against his desk. "I need to say something," he said. "When you got fired, I thought it was wrong. I told Greg that. He brushed me off, said it was necessary for the company's direction." He paused. "I should have pushed harder, should have gone to the board or done something. But I didn't, and I've been carrying that around." "You kept your head down to protect your job," I said. "That's not a crime, Tom, that's survival." "Maybe," he said, "but I've learned something watching you these past few months. Real leadership isn't about surviving. It's about doing what's right, even when it's risky." He extended his hand. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove I can do that." I shook his hand. "You've proven it every day since I got back. That's why you're here." He nodded, and I could see the relief in his face. Good people carry unnecessary guilt when they work in toxic environments. One of my jobs as CEO was to let them know they could stop carrying it. Later that week, I had dinner with Marcus Chen, my main contact at Summit Ridge Capital. We met at a steakhouse in uptown Charlotte, the kind of place where deals get made over ribeyes and single malt scotch. The restaurant smelled of charred meat and expensive bourbon. Marcus was in his 50s, sharp as they come, with an MBA from Wharton and 20 years of private equity experience. "I'll be honest with you, Michael," he said after we ordered. "When we first started talking about acquiring Dartwell back in November of 2024, I wasn't sure about you as CEO. You had the financial skills, the institutional knowledge, but I didn't know if you could lead." "And now?" I asked. "Now I know you're one of the best decisions we've ever made," he said. "The numbers speak for themselves, but it's more than that. You took a dysfunctional company and turned it around without blowing it up. That takes restraint and intelligence." "It took knowing what was worth keeping," I said. "Most of Dartwell's problems weren't the people. It was the leadership structure that had poisoned everything else. Fix that, and the rest follows." Marcus raised his glass. "To fixing what's broken." I raised mine. "To building what works." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfaction. Not the hollow satisfaction of revenge, but the real satisfaction of knowing I'd done something meaningful. I'd taken my experience, my skills, and my knowledge of what Dartwell could be, and I'd made it real. The irony wasn't lost on me. Greg and Melissa had fired me to protect themselves from accountability. In doing so, they'd set in motion the exact sequence of events that would hold them accountable anyway. They'd given me the freedom to act, the motivation to succeed, and the perfect position to return from. I thought about that email I'd received back in March 2025, the cold, impersonal termination that had ended 11 years of loyalty. At the time, it had felt like a betrayal, and it was. But it was also an opportunity disguised as a setback. If they'd kept me around, I probably would have stayed in my role indefinitely, maintaining the systems while watching Greg slowly run the company into mediocrity. I would have been comfortable, secure, and ultimately unfulfilled. The firing forced me to think bigger, to see myself not just as a financial manager, but as someone capable of leading an entire organization. In a strange way, Greg did me a favor. He just didn't know it at the time. That evening, I drove home to my house in Myers Park, a neighborhood in Charlotte I'd bought into back in 2018. Same house, same neighborhood, same life in many ways. The familiar smell of cut grass drifted through my open car window. But I was different. I'd been tested in a way I never expected, and I'd passed. Not by being louder or more aggressive than my enemies, but by being smarter and more patient. I poured myself that same bourbon I'd had after my first week back, sat on my back porch, and thought about the path that had led me here. The quiet years of building expertise, the slow recognition that something was wrong, the careful documentation, the strategic networking, the patience to wait for the right moment, and then the execution. Calm, methodical, unstoppable. I didn't win because I wanted revenge. I won because I was better at my job than the people who tried to eliminate me. And in corporate America, competence combined with opportunity is an unbeatable combination. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. Q3 numbers just came in. Best quarter in company history. Couldn't have done it without you. I smiled and typed back, "We did it together. That's how it's supposed to work." And it was. Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about making everyone in the room smarter. Greg never understood that. Melissa never understood that. But I did. And that made all the difference. I sat there as the sun set over Charlotte, the sky turning from gold to purple, thinking about how strange life can be. 6 months ago, I'd been fired by email, humiliated and discarded. Today, I was running the same company, proving every day that I was exactly what they'd needed all along. They'd tried to write me out of the story. Instead, they'd just started the chapter where I became the author. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.